Welcome to Simpson at 8. I'm Livia Movono sitting in for Stanley Simpson. Tonight we look at domestic violence. Fiji has some of the highest rates in the world. It is an issue that touches very close to our culture and our communities, often looked at as taboo. But in the business, how do you address domestic violence? In a workplace, how do you support someone that is going through violence in the home? Tonight, we are privileged to have the company of Shabnam Hameed from the International Finance Corporation in Sydney, whose organization has just completed a survey into 3 workplaces in Fiji looking at the business response to domestic violence. Welcome to Simpson at 8, and thank you for making your time. Tell us, why does the IFC, a member of the World Bank, respond to an issue that some consider very personal in Pacific communities? Why gender-based violence?
Gender-based violence affects 1 out of 3 women worldwide and up to 2 out of 3 women in Fiji. It's a barrier not only in terms of individuals' physical, mental, spiritual health, it's also a barrier to economic participation. And it's a barrier to employment. The reason why we're looking at it as a workplace issue is to help those individuals affected, to help the companies where those individuals are employed, and to help the economy as a whole.
In terms of the relevance of the response that workplaces can have to such an issue, it really is about economic growth and productivity, isn't it?
I think it's about a couple of things. I think first and foremost, it's about helping those around you. And I think a workplace, like any other community, is one where people form human bonds. And the workplaces that we're dealing with, first and foremost, want to help their employees with the issues that they face. An economic costing or a financial costing, such as we've done, helps to get workplaces to think about this in a different way. It's not just about helping people that are closest to yourselves. It's also about the cost and savings of making a response. Our argument is domestic violence is costing you 10 days per employee per year, regardless of whether that employee has experienced violence or not. It is already a cost. By taking proactive action, you can actually save money and help the people around you.
And so tell us a little bit about this report. What has it come from? You've done a survey. Tell us about the methodology and who you worked with, what sort of organizations were involved. What was the sample size of the population and things like that?
Yeah. So the report covers 3 companies participated in the study, and the study had 3 parts. One was a literature review to see, what had come before us. We didn't want to replicate what had already been done. The second was key informant interviews with both supervisory and non-supervisory staff from the 3 companies. And the third aspect of the study was a survey. The survey was completed by 33% of employees at the 3 companies, so 563 people completed this survey. The sectors that we chose for the report, we wanted it to cover as much of the working population in the formal sector of Fiji as possible. And we had companies from different aspects of the Fijian economy participating. So we had companies that have jobs in finance, in business administration, in mechanical repairs. So a wide cross-section of Fijian business
and I
sector.
suppose also you addressed both violence against women and violence against men, something that is kind of new in this work to address gender-based violence, isn't it?
The reason why we do that is twofold. One, I believe that anyone who is a victim of violence should get the support that they need. And 2, it's a workplace policy. In a workplace, you can't discriminate based on someone's gender. It is against, principles of anti-discrimination. And thirdly, it's a pragmatic reason. If we go to the workplace and talk about this just as a women's issue, what we get is half the population of the workplace, depending on how many men and women are employed. What we get is a substantial number of the employees turning off and saying, this doesn't affect me. Yep, doesn't apply to me. And so what we want is a response where the whole workplace is involved. Because in as much as the response is about creating supports for employees that are affected by violence, it is also about a culture change. And it's about people being able to talk about this issue in a different way than might have previously happened. And that involves everyone in the workplace being included in a response.
Okay. And you're saying that you discussed violence in every strata of an organization. So no matter how junior they were or even senior management, you had employees from everywhere answering. Yeah. And the response showed that violence is present with everyone?
Yep, so the demographics of our survey is approximately a third from junior levels, approximately a third from mid-level, and a third from senior levels. What the research shows is that whether you're in a trades job, whether you're in a white-collar job, whether you're in junior, mid or senior level in the organisation, domestic and sexual violence affects everyone. Anyone can be a victim of violence.
And does that sort of validate the idea that workplaces or business organizations absolutely must make this their business, and then taking away from prevalent belief that violence in the home or domestic violence, is a personal issue and not taboo? The fact that it happens to everyone in every workplace.
Our discussion with business about why it's a workplace issue is about things that business cares about, so productivity, about absenteeism, so either lateness or absence from work. And many businesses in the Pacific, but also more generally globally, these are key issues in terms of getting core business done. And so from our point of view and from many businesses' point of view, if their staff are affected by depression, for instance, there's a lot of interest globally around supporting people with mental health issues. It becomes a business issue because it affects their employee well-being and hence their productivity. And in the same way, domestic violence, whether it happens in or near the workplace or outside the workplace, becomes a business issue because people aren't robots. When they come into work, if something has happened outside the workplace and they're thinking about that, they're injured, they're not concentrating at work. With domestic violence, they might also find it difficult to come to work. And they might also not be safe at work. They might be being harassed while they're at the workplace, most commonly through text messages, phone calls, but sometimes the perpetrator actually comes into work. Okay. So in all these ways, it is a workplace issue.
Okay. In the next segment, we're going to be talking to Shabnam about what are the specific ordeals that employees face on a daily basis as they're at work and as they're going through or maybe have just come out of a violent situation. We find out what the figures are in terms of who else in the office is actually also dealing with friends or workmates who are suffering from domestic violence. Stay with us as we look in detail on what this report actually says. Welcome back. You're on Simpson at 8, and we're talking to Shabnam Hameed, the author of the International Finance Corporation report on the business case for workplace response to domestic and sexual violence in Fiji. Shabnam is talking to us about what employees who are facing violent situations or sexual violence situations at home actually go through. Shabnam, you're just telling us about some of the ways that domestic violence from the home leads into the workplace. What do staff go through according to the people that you talk to in this survey?
So there are many different impacts of domestic violence in the workplace. I think most people's minds go to the physical impacts, so people being injured, or people thinking about what had happened and being distracted from work. So definitely there are physical and mental health impacts. But there are many other impacts that have become clear through this study and also our previous work in the Pacific. So broadly speaking, there are a few different ways it affects employees. Perpetrators of domestic violence in particular, they are often very controlling people. And what they'll often do is try and damage someone's employment or try and even get them fired. So that the victim becomes even more dependent on them. And so there are a number of tactics that they'll use. One is to stop them going to work or cause them to be late for work. And they can do this in a number of ways. It might be things like hiding their car keys, hiding their bus money, or it could be things like refusing to care for children. So the employee can't actually make it to work. It could be trying to damage their employment by harassing them at work. So receiving phone calls, emails, turning up at the workplace. It could also be impact on colleagues, clients, managers, etc. And often through this controlling behaviour, they'll often, the perpetrators will often call the reception person to say, where is my wife? She was meant to be home, or and absolutely keep track of often their intimate partner, but sometimes other members of the family as a way of controlling them. They may also try and damage the person's reputation
at work.
Yeah, by calling the manager, speaking to colleagues, and saying negative things, often about their morality. Perpetrators will also get it into their heads that people aren't going to work to go to work. They'll get it into their heads that they're going to work to have an affair. And what they'll do is ring the workplace and announce this and try and damage the person's reputation, and or get it into their heads that their spouse is having an affair with a particular person at work. And then that person will also start receiving abusive, threatening, harassing contact. The other thing that we also see in terms of impact on the employee at work is damage of company property. So things like hiding, destroying ID cards, making it difficult for the person to get to work, cutting up work uniforms, damaging company files, whether they be electronic or hard copy, damaging cars or other company property. It's a way of controlling the victim and also embarrassing them because, someone doesn't want to come to work and say, this is happening to me and this is the 5th time I need to get my ID card replaced this month.
And why do people who go through this, why do they not want to say that at work? Why do they not want to communicate to their workmates or to their supervisors perhaps that that they're going through this? What has come out of your survey?
Our study shows that for many women, they don't want to talk about it at work because they're afraid of gossip. So they're afraid that if they talk to someone about it at work, that it will, damage their reputation, that it will spread like wildfire. For many men, they don't want to talk about it at work because they don't know who to talk to. Most of the kind of support for domestic and sexual violence is targeted
directed towards women.
Yeah. And so for men to reach out for help on this issue is quite difficult because it really challenges the gender norm that it's
masculinity.
Yeah. Yeah.
But are there services for men in this country?
Yes, there are, yeah. So there are a number of services, Empower Pacific and Medical Services Pacific do provide counselling services and other support services for men that are affected by violence.
And what is some of the impact to businesses when these things are happening to the men or the women who are facing intimate partner violence at home? What is the impact to business at work?
Okay, so if you're going through this, imagine if you were going through this, it's going to be really hard to concentrate. So this means that there's a productivity loss.
Presentism.
Yeah. So basically
you're
people
there.
are at work, but they're not able to deliver to 100% because, you know, they're facing a crisis. So there's a productivity loss. You might find it difficult to get to work. You might be late for work. Because of, you know, the actual violence, or because you're dealing with the ramifications of the violence. So for instance, you might need to go to the hospital, you might need to see a counsellor, you might need to go to court, you might need to see the police, you might need to relocate housing.
So you need time off.
Yeah.
And if you take it, you can't explain that at work. So that's just you being absent.
Yeah.
Or as some of your respondents in previous surveys said, that's just you not being at work without being sick.
Yep.
Taking a sick leave when you're not really sick.
Yeah.
Is there better understanding, you think? I understand that the Fijian survey goes off of the back of a successful survey of the same nature that you did in the Solomon Islands. Is this sort of surveys and this report in particular, is it giving light to what's happening to staff that maybe workplaces don't know about, you think?
I think, it's very useful for the businesses to understand what might be affecting the employees and also then how to respond. So, you know, while someone may be off on sick leave when they don't look visibly sick, you know, this causes resentment and it causes a breakdown of trust.
Yes.
When an employee can actually say, look, I need some time off to do X, Y, and Z, all the workplaces that we're dealing with will grant that time. You know, and part of the next steps coming out of the survey is actually to create a structured response. So employees know that if they're in this situation, who do they talk to at the workplace? What can the workplace offer them? And the kind of supports that the workplace can offer is, first and foremost, referral to the experts in this field, you know, people like the Fiji Women's Crisis Centre and other services that can actually counsel the person in terms of what to do about the violence. That's not the workplace's job, but the workplace can facilitate that referral. What the workplace can do is make reasonable adjustment. So in the same way, if someone at the workplace is facing long-term illness, you know, the workplace doesn't, you know, go and get a medical degree and fix that issue.
It's not counselling service. It's not the violence crisis centre.
Yeah, but what they can do is give people time off to go see the experts and make reasonable adjustment. Okay, you need to be at court. Okay, well, you know, here's some paid time so that you can go to court and resolve this issue. That helps both the individual affected, also their families, and the business.
So as difficult as it is for a woman and those close to her work family maybe to go through the ramifications of domestic violence, there are things that workplaces can do. And this survey seeks to inform the process that makes the policies, if you want, or the guidelines by which people in the workplace can respond to domestic violence. And in the next segment, we're going to talk about some of the work that the IFC have planned to socialize a business response to domestic violence. Welcome back to Simpson at 8. We're talking to the International Finance Corporation's Gender Operations Officer, Shabnam Hameed, who's in Suva this week to launch a report based on a survey that looks at how workplaces can respond to domestic violence. So what, Shabnam, what can workplaces do if an employee comes into work with visible injuries, or maybe gain the courage to tell somebody, I'm going through this, I need time off for this, or when I pulled the sickie earlier this week, it was for this. What can a workplace do?
I think there's a lot of practical things that a workplace can do. The first thing they can do is listen to the employee and to sensitively accept that disclosure. I think without training, a lot of people often jump to try and solving the situation. I think the key thing the workplace can do is actually ask the employee what they need and want at that time. Then in terms of what practical steps, there are a few things. One is referring the employee to the experts, whether that be the police, whether that be a crisis centre, whether that be counselling, etc. And supporting the employee to access those services. So a lot of times people have difficulty making that first phone call, making that first visit, or indeed have just logistical problems getting from one service provider to the next. So workplaces can facilitate that. So right here in Fiji, there are workplaces already doing work around this issue where they do help those employees make those phone calls, can explain to them what they can expect, and will also provide them paid time to go to those services. And some of the employers are actually providing transportation to and from those services.
And these are the workplaces who have been part of this survey?
Yes, so this is what we've learned by doing the survey. So there is the whole aspect of connection to the referral service. Then the next aspect really is how do you make the workplace safe? And so asking the employee questions about, you know, has the perpetrator ever come to the workplace, threatened to come to the workplace, or made any threats against, you know, your colleagues' clients, and get an idea of what that looks like. And there's some really practical steps. Look, the workplace aren't the police, but what they can do is if the employee, for instance, has a restraining order, has a protection order, with the employee's permission, and particularly if the workplace is included in that protection order, can give that to security with a photo of the perpetrator.
Yep.
And what security can then do is call the police if there's a breach. And so it can keep the workplace safe. If the employee is receiving harassing phone calls, text messages, etc., and it's on a company email, the workplace can easily change that email address or screen the phone calls. So there's some very practical steps that that workplaces can do in terms of safety. There's also reasonable adjustment in terms of the employee's work schedule for a period of time. So if the person is in crisis, the employer might want to consider with the employee a reduction in work for a period of time and organising for some support around that work. If the person is, say, leaving violence and needs to relocate, etc., the employer can also provide time off or flexibility around those issues.
Okay.
I think the main thing I found doing this work in the Pacific globally more generally is that once these discussions happen, that both the employee and the employer feel a sense of relief.
Yes.
You know, because you can have an honest conversation about what the needs are, both from a personal point of view and the business's point of view, in terms of, you know, what needs to be get done and how that can be structured. And some of the asks aren't actually huge. They're not, I want 3 months off work. Yes. In Australia, a number of different companies have published how much time on average a person asks off for domestic violence, and it's 2 to 3 days. That's
a year.
A year.
Okay.
And that's not per employee whether they've experienced violence or not. That is each individual who experiences violence, on average, asks between 2 to 3 days off. So jumping to this idea that, you know, giving employees time off will lead to a massive increase in them being away from work. Actually, I think the facts are showing that that's not the case. Yeah.
And just with regards to the similar work that you did in the Solomon Islands with the Bank of South Pacific Solomon Islands branch and their own successes, do you find that, you know, if you're looking at it, we have to look at it's a social issue, but we have to, when you look at it from a business perspective, there's some expense involved, you know, when you put in these extra practical measures, as you call them, to make the workplace safe and secure for the person that's suffering from domestic violence. But have you found, or have your previous survey respondents found, that those costs are recouped?
So what the Bank of South Pacific found was that within a few weeks of completing the training, that a couple of employees came forward and disclosed that they were experiencing domestic violence, and the bank was able to help them. What they calculated was that had the employees not come forward, that these employees would probably have been terminated because they were absent without cause, or seemingly without cause, and their productivity was not good.
They weren't meeting work targets.
They weren't meeting work targets. Because the employees disclosed, the bank was able to provide them with referral, etc., and some support. Their productivity increased, and they were kept employed. What the Bank of South Pacific in Solomon Islands has told us is that simply saving those 2 jobs has recouped the entire expense of creating a policy, training staff, and raising awareness about the issue.
And is it in fact ensuring that productivity remains consistent or at least continues to grow?
I think overall productivity will increase when employers look at the issues that employees are facing and support them. I think it's not going to be a smooth line. I think there'll be ups and downs. I think if someone's in crisis, whether because of domestic and sexual violence or because of a death in the family or many other life events that we go through, of course all our productivity suffers. But I think being able to talk about that in an honest way with your employer actually helps you to improve much more quickly because you're not then wearing like double guilt.
Yes,
yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
So knowing this and knowing the raw information that have come from the employees of Fiji who were part of your respondents, what's the positive thing to look for? What's the silver lining on all of this? What is the IFC able to do or maybe support others to do to ensure that workplaces who realize the value of responding to this issue can do so and can do so productively? What is the IFC going to do next?
The silver lining is that there are many employers in Fiji who want to address domestic and sexual violence as a workplace issue. We had F&PF at today's launch, very eager to address this issue, and there are many others like them. So the IFC plans on providing support to these employers through a workshop series and through training. And the workshop series will help the companies to develop the policies and the framework, whether it's around creating a workplace culture where people feel safe to raise their issues, the actual policy around domestic violence, and also a framework for communicating about the issue, so behavioural change communications. The training will focus very much on how to respond to this as a workplace issue. So what we're planning on doing is actually going to be Pacific-wide. It's very exciting. We're going to be training 30 to 40 professionals, whether it be from the private sector and also from gender-based violence areas, to look at the mix between workplace issues and gender-based violence issues, and to be able to support businesses and the private sector and workplaces as a whole across the Pacific on this issue, to be able to answer questions like, what does reasonable adjustment look like?
Yes.
Yeah.
And what kind of leave do you provide for someone who's going to go through this?
Yeah. How do you manage a performance issue at the same time as supporting someone for a domestic or sexual violence?
That's all we have time for tonight. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for welcoming Shabnam, Hameed and I to your home as we discuss domestic violence. Follow our updates for more information on how you can support somebody that is going through violence in the home. Join us again for Simpson at 8 on Thursdays at 8.